This week on Talking Politics USA, is the Trump-Musk bromance really over? And what will his legacy be?
If there's anything the president wants me to do, I'm at the president's service.
I truly believe he wanted to make a difference.
The long-term legacy of his kind of very aggressive cost-cutting could be really considerable.
Dan goes behind the scenes with the MAGA media covering the White House.
They love us not because we're sycophants or shills for them, but because we reach the people who helped elect President Trump.
And why tacos are ruffling the president's feathers.
That's a nasty question.
This is the guy who likes to call people names, and now he's getting called a name.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Lucy Watson, and joining me this week is our US correspondent, Dan Rivers. As ever, how are you doing, Dan?
Very well, very well. Nice to be here.
Nice to see you, as always. And also on the show today is the former White House Director of Events, Laura Schwartz. Laura, it is great to have you back. I've missed you. I know you've been away in Japan for a few weeks, haven't you?
I have. I was over in Japan doing some research for an upcoming project and also just really enjoying it and taking in the culture. So it felt great to be abroad for 3 weeks and quite refreshing as well.
I bet. Now, what was the kind of reaction there, or what are people guessing and thinking about Trump's return to the White House? Is it a big talking point out there too?
You know what? More of a talking point than I thought it would be. Obviously, they were speaking about trade deals, possible trade negotiations in the daily newspaper. But it was really more in my conversations with folks. I met 4 folks from Canada, of course, in a bar while I was in Tokyo. And they had just come up from the subway station, of which somebody saw one of their Canadian flags on their baseball hat and pointed at them saying, "Oh, 51, 51. Because the 51st state thing, of which Trump keeps kind of dragging Canada on, definitely has made its way overseas as far as the land grab. So that was interesting to see that they were really in tune to just the land grab. You know, what's happening as far as, is there going to be a United States expansion? A few folks asked me about Greenland and that possibility. And then there was one other really interesting conversation, only because we just came off of a Q&A show for Talking Politics USA, where Kay from Facebook wrote in and asked if it was safe for LGBTQ travelers from abroad to come to the United States. I was sort of taken aback that was a question, but since then I received 2 questions similar to that while in Japan.
Really, really interesting. Now, the first thing I definitely want to talk to you both about today is that the bromance is over, isn't it? Friday, we came to the end of Elon Musk's term, shall we say, in the White House. Now, I know that the role that he had, he wasn't supposed to stay beyond May. I remember you saying that to me, Dan, a couple of weeks ago. But during his time in office, I mean, Tesla's brand, the reputation his company has plummeted. The shareholders must be pulling him back to get him to refocus. Why has he gone? And what do you see the main reason being, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, he's taken a lot of incoming fire, I suppose you could put it like that, during his time in the White House. And he has been physically in the White House for some of that. And as you say, the share price of Tesla has sort of collapsed, really. I mean, not only that, we've had people firebombing Tesla dealerships because they're so furious with Elon Musk's attempts to cut back on bureaucracy and, you know, his Department of Government Efficiency, laying off thousands of federal workers and, closing down entire government departments like USAID. The spin is that he was only ever going to do 130 days, and this was the end of a sort of inevitable beginning period. But I think for sure that kind of political heat that he's taken has factored into this. I mean, they were both at pains in that appearance in the Oval Office to suggest that this, that Elon Musk was going to continue to be involved in some way, that the friendship remained, and that he would continue to advise Donald Trump. But definitely this is the end of this first chapter.
Well, let's just have a little look at that tearful, maybe not so tearful, goodbye in the Oval Office at the tail end of last week.
Well, I expect to continue to provide advice whenever the president would like advice.
I hope so.
I expect to remain a friend and an advisor, and certainly if there's anything the president wants me to do, I'm at the president's service.
Many of the Doge people, Elon, are staying behind
Yes.
too, so they're not
Absolutely.
leaving. And Elon's really not leaving. He's going to be back and forth, I think. I have a feeling. It's his baby, and I think he's going to be doing a lot of things.
Laura, can I ask, what do you think these two men really liked about each other?
Their wealth, their access, and their opportunity. Trump loves being around other wealthy people. And he especially likes being around them when they're useful. I truly believe he wanted to make a difference. Elon came in saying he wanted to he was going to cut $2 trillion in just months after arriving. Then earlier in the administration, he said, okay, $1 trillion. Now he says we cut $175 billion, although it looks that third-party outside estimates are only about $16 billion. It may not have been as successful as they wanted, but he's still happy that he made that impact. But let's look at what that impact is costing him. It cost him a lot of treasure, personally, professionally. His board at Tesla is not happy with him. It's interesting, he had a bruised eye in the Oval Office.
Oh, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, he said that he was playing with his son, and he told the son, "Go ahead and punch me, little X," and he punched him. Now, we don't know if that's true or not, but I think he also really left with that bruised ego and reputation. Now, it looks like that had been sort of disintegrating, and Dan, I bet you've heard some of this inside the Beltway as well, that his relationship with Trump and like senior advisors in the administration was starting to get a little bit rocky. It sounded like some of the White House staff and especially the cabinet agencies, as he was slashing their staff, were not all that thrilled with him towards the end. And he started going less and less to the White House.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we heard about this stand-up row that he had with Scott Bessent outside the Oval Office, where expletives were being, shouted at the tops of their voices. A lot of tension with Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, as well, during his attempts to sort of slash and burn federal workers and cut their budgets. The other interesting thing is, there was an interesting op-ed in the New York Times about his legacy, and you've touched on the fact that he saved a lot less money than he claimed he was going to save. Some people actually saying he may have actually cost money because of all the payouts that they've had to make, but also the wider legacy of what it means for development around the world and how many people potentially could have died as a result of some of these programs being cut back in places like sub-Saharan Africa. One figure suggesting, sort of 300,000 deaths as a direct result of cutting back on kind of vaccination programs and so on. And ending things like vaccinations or developing a vaccine for bird flu, for example, which could be the next pandemic to hit. What the long-term legacy of his kind of very aggressive cost cutting could be really considerable.
Now, Dan, the other thing I wanted to ask you with regards to this relationship, I mean, Donald Trump said inside the Oval Office in that brief statement that we just heard, he'll be back. We probably will see a return of Elon Musk behind those walls again. But does Donald Trump not need him financially? I mean, he was, integral financially during the election campaign. Does he not need him still in that way?
Yeah. I think so. I think, he's the richest man in the world. I think he contributed, was it $270 million to Donald Trump's campaign. You've got the midterms coming up next year. These big donors are critical. And I'm sure Donald Trump is acutely aware of that. But I think there's more to that relationship than purely a financial one. I think Donald Trump One former Trump staffer told us, he loves a winner, Donald Trump. He loves to surround himself with people who are successful, and he looks up to Elon Musk. He's always describing him as a genius. We've got to protect our geniuses. I think he looks up to him and wants some of that reflected intelligence and success to shine on him as president.
Now, Dan, if my spies and my sources serve me correctly, you've been at the White House yourself this week. Just tell me what you've been doing. Something to do with new media? We're part of, I suppose, the traditional media, aren't we? ITV, BBC, and Channel 4 and the like here. And traditional media in the States, I don't know, NBC, PBS, CBS, ABC. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head all of them from when I was out there. So you have been talking to those who are part of the new media realm near the White House, is that right?
Yeah, and this is sort of a realm that the current administration are really trying to encourage into the sort of media bubble in the White House. Whereas previously they have really had very limited access. Suddenly it's being opened up to all sorts of new podcasters, to people who've got online shows who are not necessarily part of, as you say, the sort of traditional media. I've been talking to Natalie Winters, who's a really interesting character. She's only 24 years old. She's part of Steve Bannon's War Room program. In fact, she sort of hosted it while he was in prison. I don't know if you remember, he ended up in prison, but he's out now, and she still takes part regularly. And she's sort of a pretty kind of controversial figure in a way, not only because of her very right-wing viewpoint and politics, but because she's so young. She's very disparaging about the legacy media, as she calls it. So we did a bit of a walk around the White House with her to get a sense of how she views this new media environment.
So Natalie, here we are in the grounds of the White House. Yes. This is where you do the majority of your work. I do some of my work as well. Just tell us what it's been like being here, for someone who's relatively new to reporting politics here.
It's only been a few months. Our audience is absolutely loving it, having a seat in the room, but we've sort of approached the role differently. Less so reporting on what the White House is doing. There's plenty of people who are doing that, but really reporting on how the media is trying to wage warfare and opposition against President Trump. So it's been nice to have a front row seat to all that.
Right, so just talk us through what we're seeing here. This is what people sometimes call Pebble Beach, is that right? What does that mean?
Yes, Pebble Beach. So these are all the more kind of legacy outlets that have their tents. If it were up to me, I'd put the new media people in the tents. Frankly, we have more viewership, so it probably seems fitting, but these are where they do the outdoor shots. But the new media people, we'll see up there, there's sort of a grassy patch where people can set up cameras, use their phones. We have a whole setup, but that always sort of changes day to day.
And over here, this is obviously the actual White House. We've got the West Wing of the White House over here. I don't know, we got some visitors. President Trump isn't here as we're speaking.
They've opened it up for tours.
Oh, have they? Right,
yes.
Today, because it's a Friday. What is the kind of attitude of the White House towards new media like you now? Has it changed a lot, do you think?
Look, I think they love us not because we're sycophants or shills for them, but because we reach the people who helped elect President Trump, who support his agenda, who believe in putting America first. And I'd also even push back this term of new media. First of all, it's so, I think, monolithic when you're describing so many different outlets, but also, too, the Biden regime, as we call it, they had their own rendition of new media, and that was the vast censorship of the American people that was happening covertly behind closed doors, the back channels between social media companies, the federal government, and a lot of these legacy media outlets who oftentimes refuse to report on those stories. So this is sort of a different take on new media, which is actually giving the American people what they want, outlets that they listen to, as opposed to just getting propaganda talking points from legacy media outlets that all they can do is oppose President Trump.
Okay, so I hear that. What would you say to people who say, well, look, can you honestly challenge President Trump? Part of the job of the media is to is to call them out and stuff. Are you able to do that?
We do it, and we do it all the time. I sort of call it the horseshoe theory of opposition. Obviously, the legacy media is going to be all over President Trump for all things immigration, saying that, oh, well, because of the 10 plus million people that Joe Biden imported, one person you maybe got a little bit wrong, and they're going to overwhelmingly focus on that. We've been calling them out for the H-1B visa, so that's the importing of foreign laborers. That's a debate that has been going on even since before he was sworn in, that my show has always been sort of ahead of the curve. We've been insisting that the numbers for mass deportations need to be a lot higher. We think that, frankly, they should privatize the mass deportations. We're against kinetic involvement, these forever wars, the warmongering in Iran. We're very anti that. This sort of, I think, factions that you see in the Trump administration, certain there's more, neocon type war hawks. We're very anti that. We're very opposed to that. Even on some of the student protester issues, right? The framing of it as deporting people who are anti-Israel, that's a framing that we've been sort of critical of, because we're for deporting students who are anti-America, and particularly those that are from the PRC. We see that as a very, very existential national security threat, and if it were up to them, we'd deport all 350,000 of them.
People's Republic of China.
Yes.
So I hear all that. What has been the reception from, as you call it, the legacy media, the big networks? Are they quite hostile to you?
Well, I think it's quite interesting that they're just starting to cover the new media now, right? Because we're not really all that new. War Room's been around for a while, and these are sort of trends in media that you've seen even really since before President Trump's second term. They're just now being forced to reckon with it, I think, an effort to sort of reverse engineer, the left's crusade to find their own Joe Rogan. The difference is that it's not about the personalities, it's with the set of facts that we're dealing with, and we would argue that we've actually been right, whether it was Joe Biden's mental health, the origins of COVID, the COVID vaccine, in general, the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. So they mock us, they ridicule us. I mean, they're respectful. I obviously respect the institution that is the press briefing room, but they're not overly welcoming. But in other words, we're the ones holding a mirror to their face, right? It's a perpendicular trend line in terms of viewership and impact. So of course they're not going to like us being here. They no longer have a chokehold or stranglehold on the information that the American people receive, or at least coming from this sort of very, I would say, prestigious backing of the White House. We have that now.
You touched on Joe Biden and his health.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the CNN anchor Jake Tapper's come out with this book suggesting there was effectively a cover-up by the Democrat Party. Is that something that you think is now getting more credence with the legacy media, as you put it?
Oh, that's an absolute joke and a scam. And unless Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson want to donate their book proceeds to either maybe cancer research or a newfound journalism school, I don't think anyone should buy that book. These people are clowns. The idea that it was just the Democratic Party apparatus that covered for Joe Biden, the media is an extension of that. I guess that's the new racket for the Democratic Party, where they cover up for someone, they cover up a story for years, and they profit off on the other side of it, writing books. But I think just a broader trend that we've sort of seen in American politics, if you want to really get granular on that topic, a lot of the reason why the American people voted for President Trump was this idea that they're tired of these unelected bureaucrats making decisions. And the fact that you could have had a president who mentally was so absent for so long, right? Essentially no cognizance. I believe I've previously described him as essentially dead, and that you could have had an administration go on, create all the havoc it did, not just here but abroad, for 4 years, shows you that that presidential role really has become sort of ceremonial and performative, and that these unelected, whether they're admin officials, career servants, political servants, take your pick, that they're the ones who are making the decisions. And that is what the American people are really, really upset about, and that's why you see President Trump going after what's perhaps called the deep state. I think that's too nice or cutesy a term. This is the permanent political class, these unelected bureaucrats who have their own set of policy, and it shows that you could literally have a dead president for 4 years, and they will run cover for him. And now these people want to lecture me that I'm not good enough at my job. Okay, I never covered up for someone who's basically dead.
So this is the famous backdrop.
Yes.
And where do you get a seat here, or do you have to stand?
Well, just like the tents, if it were up to me, and I know they've been mulling it over, potentially replacing some of the legacy media seats with the new media members. Haven't seen any movement on that. If it were up to me, I'd probably kick a lot of these people out. But a lot of the new media people stand sort of in that corner or this corner. Sometimes there's some, should we say, some tussles, some toss-ups over people raising their hands and blocking people's faces, so it can get a little petty, but...
And how do they decide who to call on for a question?
So that's going to be up to the press secretary. She usually always hits sort of the front row, usually gets a few new media questions in. I think the legacy media always sort of has a certain narrative that they're pushing. Usually it's probably setting the discourse on immigration to caring about, illegal alien convicted criminals and drug traffickers, those types, and they're really concerned about the human rights of those people, but that's not what most American people care about. So you probably, the more to the extremities you get, you're probably going to get questions that are more in line with what actual Americans care about. So sometimes you'll hear her say, does anyone have any questions that aren't about, insert whatever the topic is that the legacy media is really salivating over that day.
You've sort of come, I suppose, to be an emblem of the sort of Gen Z, young, right-leaning generation that maybe are looking for an alternative voice. Do you think there is a trend where young people are drifting to the right in America?
Well, I think you saw it certainly with the last election from a voting perspective. I think it's maybe a shift or reorientation in priorities. And I think the idea of people wanting to be able to buy a house, not, be disadvantaged from jobs because of whether it's DEI or affirmative action, live in a country with a secure border and not have to worry about their safety. Those are issues that I think affect really all demographics, but I think they have become so bad, so uniquely horrible under Joe Biden, that they sort of were enough to galvanize people who previously hadn't really voted, right? I think there's the politics of mobilization and persuasion. I think the conservative value set has always sort of been more persuasive probably to young men, but really that mobilization aspect was what I think the Trump campaign really honed in on, sort of by leveraging, right, the alternative media, the podcasts, but really I think representing the stakes that you have to lose if Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or whatever other essentially dead person they'd want to run had won.
So Dan, what did you make of her personally? I mean, I'm a bit staggered, to be honest, about how young she is.
She's young and she's incredibly opinionated, a bit like Steve Bannon. She can talk and talk. You have to really rein her in. Steve Bannon, I remember, gave me the longest soundbite I have ever got on camera at a Conservative conference, where he talked as we walked from one end of the conference to the other. I think it was about 10 minutes non-stop of Steve Bannon just sort of holding forth. And she's very much kind of out of that stable. She's interesting as well, not only because of her politics and her disdain for the mainstream media, as she would call it, but she's also got her own fashion brand called She's So Right. So she sells sort of bags and T-shirts and all kinds of things. So she's a real dynamic presence, whether you agree with her politics or not. She's certainly shaking things up in the White House. And of course, the Trump administration absolutely love her.
Laura, so the idea of this new media was very different from your time in the White House. How do you see the power of the likes of podcasters, YouTube channel, YouTube like hosts and things like that? How do you see their role within the Trump administration, and how does it compare to when you were there?
Yeah, I mean, look, people consume media in many different ways today compared to when I was there with the Clinton administration. I was in the White House press office before I became the White House director of events and was responsible for pool movements in the White House press corps, traveling with the president. And the thing is, I absolutely think that it should be the ability, you need to reach people where they are. And it's not only the traditional legacy media networks and wire services and radio. But, when we think about the White House press corps, that press briefing room and the White House Correspondents Association was created to give accountability to the American people on the administration in office, whether that's Democrat or Republican, to ask the tough questions, to ask questions of which then readers and viewers and listeners can judge on how what they're doing inside the White House affects them, no matter where they live throughout the country or the world, for that matter. And so I think increasing access is a good idea. But when you start just bringing in pro-administration talking heads, what does that do? What does that serve the whole of the American people? It serves the right-wing media that listens to it, that wants in. When I was the White House director of events, I always made sure that if we had an event where we had a Democratic member of Congress, on stage with the president to talk about what the president was discussing, we need a Republican. And you need, so if they want to open up to pro right wing, they should open it up to pro Democratic.
The other kind of worrying trend in this White House, yes, it's refreshing perhaps that they're opening it up to some new media, but on the other hand, they're closing it down to very well respected agencies like the Associated Press, for example, got kicked out of the White House pool because they refused to use the term the Gulf of America. And you're seeing this sort of self-censorship as well. I noticed it during the Elon Musk appearance. Only one person attempted to ask about this story concerning his drug use, which
the New York Times investigation, and he shut it right down, didn't he?
Shut it right down, and no one followed up. Now, under previous administrations, the press would hunt as a pack a little bit, and you get multiple questions from different agencies trying to harry and get to the truth. But it feels like there's a degree of self-censorship now because journalists are worried, I think, that if they ask difficult questions, they're going to get less access to the White House, like the Associated Press.
And it's also really interesting, Dan, to hear from journalists that covered the Kremlin for years, who said that, Putin handpicks the reporters in his office on his trips, of which will only report what they need to be reported. And especially when the AP was kicked out, and then a judge said that was that was against their First Amendment rights. But they have taken more control over access to the president. And, when you control access through media, you're also controlling access to the American people. And the deal is this: when you're elected president, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. When you walk into that Oval Office, you're no longer on a rally stage. You're not on a debate stage against a Democrat or Republican. You are there not just with those that voted for you, but you're there with the entire country and the world, for that matter, because you represent everyone when you walk into that office. And when you start taking away access to reporters that are holding the administration accountable and reporting on the facts, not just the perceived truths, I think that is really a denigration of the presidency itself.
And I suppose it kind of moves us on quite easily onto Harvard, Dan. I know you were there last week. I mean, this freedom of speech at one of America's, if not the best, academic institutions. What is Donald Trump's administration's problem with it? Why does it seem to want to tear it down?
Well, I think they see it as a sort of hotbed of radical left-wing politics, I think is probably how they would put it. Harvard would clearly push back on that very vigorously and say, this is all part of what a university should be, having open and free discussions about issues of the day. But this kind of is a one aspect of the wider debate on the kind of pro-Palestinian protests, which roiled a lot of universities, including Columbia in New York. And we've done quite a bit of reporting on students foreign students who've had their visas revoked, or that the Trump administration has tried to kick out, even those with a green card. In Harvard's case, this has turned into a sort of broader battle about funding as well. They're holding back federal funding, hundreds of millions of dollars of federal funding. And they're also threatening, again, the foreign students who are there, saying that Harvard can't give them student visas. So we were up there talking to several, including Brits. One, Sam Nicholson, was really fascinating. He just finished, he was there on a sort of scholarship. That had just come to an end. He was hoping to go and work in Congress to get some work experience. But now he doesn't know if his visa is going to be pulled, which would give him the right to stay here for another year. So real life repercussions for the few Brits that are there, but also, we talked to Chinese students. We talked to a Mexican student who'd been detained at the border as she tried to come back in. And ironically, also an Israeli student who also is worried about her visa. She's a PhD student in psychology. the irony of that, not lost on her. Here is the government claiming this is all about cracking down on anti-Semitism. Well, the unintended consequence of their actions might be that they end up kicking out Israeli students, the very people that they're trying to protect.
Now, despite the federal funding being pulled from Harvard, at the moment they are like kind of holding out. They're standing firm. Can it continue this, or will it have to give in to some extent to some control from the White House?
Well, just last week, Harvard had a judicial victory by blocking the administration's revocation of them being able to allow international students. But the Trump administration said right away, we're going to appeal this, and it's really going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Same thing when it comes into regards of federal funding for programs. And I think the big thing for everybody to realize on a couple of levels is that we're giving away the future advances in science and technology to other countries. Harvard has about 27% of their grad students are international. And to Dan's point, and I've read the stories in which there's a student from Israel studying in his 6th year in Harvard in grad school. And he just renewed the lease on his place in Cambridge because he may go back there to study, to do his research and outcomes than the United States. And the federal grant money that goes to Harvard, for example, goes overwhelmingly to medical research. Medical research they're conducting on cancer drugs, on dementia, on diabetes. The funding for programs that affect all Americans. This isn't just that we're giving Harvard too much. Let's see the results of what Harvard is doing with that money, absolutely. But when you look at what it's being used for, and when you look at the fact that our future, our students from around the world, this cuts down on our ability to innovate and grow as a country in ways in which we need to compete on the global stage.
Well, to lift the mood slightly as we veer towards the end of our chat today, taco. I mean, I'm rather partial to a taco, but this kind of, the way it's being used on Wall Street is my favorite story of the week, I think. Taco currently stands for Trump always chickens out, according to the traders on Wall Street. So it's not really a subtle dig at the president's trade policies, I suppose. It's right out there. It's not even a sly. It's definitely not a sly dig. It's a full-on punch, I think. And he was asked about it in a press conference and visibly bristled about it.
Mr. President, Wall Street analysts have coined a new term called the taco trade. They're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, isn't that nice? Chicken out. I've never heard that. 6 months ago, this country was stone cold dead. We had a dead country. We had a country people didn't think it was going to survive, and you ask a nasty question like that. It's called negotiation. You set a number. The sad thing is now when I make a deal with them, they'll say, oh, he was chicken. He was chicken. That's so unbelievable. But don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question.
Ooh, a nasty question. It sounds like playground kind of chat. What do you make of that, Laura?
Well, this is the guy who likes to call people names, and now he's getting called a name. I guess he was a bit ticked off at his staff because they didn't tell him about this Trump always chickens out acronym that they're using on Wall Street. In fact, about a month ago, the very beginning of May, it was used by a columnist in the Financial Times, a journalist, referred to this as taco, Trump always chickens out. So it's been out there. Now, Trump, will say, okay, Europe, we're giving you 50% tariffs again because you haven't come to the table. Oh, and now they're crawling to the table. He looks at his bargaining, he looks at this as leveraging by saying you're going to be at 50% tariffs, you're going to be at 145% tariffs, and then he sees the market tank and then gets a lot of calls from Wall Street, and then he says something to reverse it. We are halfway through the 90 days of which we were told, not just America, but all of the countries negotiating would have to negotiate their tariff agreements. And we have yet for one fully executed deal to be made. And we're halfway through that time. And it sounds to me like maybe this taco back and forth is not going to get the administration and what the countries need. So I don't think that this is going to change anything. I think that it just riles him up all that more to say what I'm doing is working, but they need to start putting some deals on the table. That's the way for them to turn that around.
Now, if you are actually watching this show, you can see some of the memes they're doing the rounds, following through with this taco theme of Donald Trump. That is a particular favourite of mine, when he's fully clad in a top to toe in a yellow suit with a chicken hat on, if you like. It's one of my favourites. But I mean, Dan, essentially Wall Street is what is right, isn't it? I mean, the White House keeps on talking tough about levying new tariffs on friends, geopolitical rivals, whatever. But Trump he's either gone lower or he's delayed. And as Laura said, we're yet to see anything definitive.
Yeah, the kind of financial reality, the gravity of the bond market, for example, that means that, he can talk tough as much as he wants, but when push comes to shove, he has had to back off these tariffs because it would, implode the entire world economy if he did carry through with these sort of crazy 150% tariffs or more for some countries. And yeah, it's been a yo-yo, hasn't it? They've been on, they've been off. I think now that he's cried wolf so many times that people just, he's beginning to lose credibility in these statements on tariffs. And the traders are making money from it, from being able to trade this taco trade by saying, okay, well, Trump's put a 50% tariff on Europe. Well, the market's going to dive. We all know he's going to back off in a week. So let's buy on that news. So I think he's getting a very tough lesson from the markets and from the bond markets about what you can do as president, and you still need to operate within the bounds of financial probity.
Now, I wonder if that brave reporter who dared to ask that question will be struck off the list for next week. That brings us nicely to a close. That is all we have time for this week. Thank you both very, very much for joining me. And remember, you can watch every episode of Talking Politics USA on ITVX and YouTube, as well as on your favourite podcast platform. And don't forget to subscribe while you're there. You can also email us if you've got a question or comment on talkingpolitics@itv.com. For now, though, that's it from Dan and from Laura and from me. Thank you all for listening and for watching. Goodbye.